welcome. It's Paris Couture Week and we're here to discuss everything that's going on in the City of Lights. It's an incredibly exciting collection because we're going to be talking about the Vionnet show, which obviously Hussein Chalayan has just been appointed there to do their demi-couture. So it's absolutely a fascinating time for the house and a fascinating time for the future of couture. And very appropriately, I have a fascinating panel with me who are real experts in all things couture and all things Chalayan, which is amazing. But I'll let you guys introduce yourselves to kick things off, starting with you, Hettie.
Hello, I'm Hettie Judah. I'm a writer and editor and I specialise in fashion, art and design.
I'm Caroline Evans. I'm a fashion historian. I teach at Central St Martin's in London.
I'm Brix Stoppard and I'm a retailer and I co-owned Start Boutique with my husband, and I'm a TV presenter presenting fashion. And these are my two dogs, Pixie and Gladys, who designed their own collection actually, Gladys and Pixie, and they have their own Twitter at Gladys and Pixie, but they're here today to,
Contribute.
pass comment.
Is it couture or ready to wear?
It is ready to wear and it is luxury accessories. Yeah.
They look very couture today in their little outfits there, it's awesome. I want to start by jumping in with this idea of reviving old houses because it's something that seems to be having an incredibly sort of exciting time at the moment, especially with Schiaparelli that we just saw yesterday. And Vionnet was actually sort of revived in 2006 and we've seen a lot of sort of comings and goings with their ready-to-wear. But now obviously we've got Hussein doing the demi-couture. But Brix, I want to ask, obviously from a retail perspective, why do you think this idea of kind of reviving these ancient names has become such a thing?
You know what, I don't know, but it's absolutely delicious and enticing. And when I heard that Vionnet was being revived originally, I was like so excited. I didn't even really know what Vionnet was really because I just hadn't, experienced it. And then I went back and dug and was like, oh, this is so cool. And it's just really exciting because I think there's such a history to it. And yeah, I don't know, it's great.
Do you think it's that idea of heritage? Because heritage seems to be so important now. People want to know kind of that, like brands like Burberry, they really play on that. Do you think?
Yeah, it adds a complete richness to it and adds a story. And it just makes it more covetable. I'm not exactly sure why.
And what is it you mentioned, when you started researching Vionnet, there's something so exciting about the house. And I want to kind of pick up on Madame Vionnet because she's kind of, and I think you're right when you say, you didn't know that much about it. I think it's one of those things where perhaps our audience, a lot of people who would be so excited to see this collection won't know that much about Madame Vionnet. She's kind of almost one of those unsung heroes in a way that a lot of people whose houses close are. Why was she so great? I'm going to go to Caroline as our resident historian.
I think you're right. She's a real designer's designer.
Yeah.
And she's, I think, often not being quite understood in a very sort of broad public forum. And the most obvious thing about her, people always say she invented the bias cut, which she didn't quite invent, but she really made her own. And she was an incredible technician, I think, because unlike a lot of early 20th century couturiers, she actually trained as a seamstress. And bias cutting is not just about, sort of putting the fabric on the diagonal and that's it. It's really about really complex seaming, complex pattern cutting, understanding textiles. So she worked with textile manufacturers. Sometimes she got them to weave them twice as wide in order to cut. And she always said that she felt she wasn't really a fashion designer. She made clothes. And it was never that seasonal what she produced. So she was one of those designers who really evolved the same sort of themes, same kind of pattern cutting over many years rather than having very specific looks.
And when you say she's a designer's designer, do you think that, I said she was an unsung hero, do you think there is a little bit of a sort of sense of that she's been a little bit forgotten? Are you happy to see it revived, as someone who knows the history of the house? Or is there always a little bit of trepidation when someone's going into...
No, I think it's incredibly exciting because I think she was in so many ways so modern. And obviously what you don't want to see, and no one wants to make a sort of recreation of clothes that were made 100 years ago or a bit less. But it's about taking the modernity of what she did and making something that's modern today in that spirit.
Yeah, and I think when you say the modernity of what she did, I think that really leads us nicely to Hussein's appointment there, because one thing with her is he is such a modern designer, and she was a very modern designer as well. This idea of the architecture that you mentioned with that bias cut, there seems to be a lot of correlation between what they do, even just in their personal life, the way they present themselves. She was a very private woman. I think it's the same with Hussein. He's not a kind of celebrity showy designer in that way. Hettie, what did you think of that appointment, when Hussein was in
Well, I think it's worth reiterating that he's only doing demi-couture.
Yeah, exactly.
Goga Ashkenazi's still doing the ready-to-wear collections. I think it's a really exciting appointment because you know, it's if you're going out there with your checkbook saying, who can I get to design for my demi couture label, you know, he's somebody that immediately screams intelligent, thoughtfulness. You know, he's always going to approach something, looking for something very original. You know, he says, I don't copy. And so this is going to be, you know, a really intellectual line, one would hope.
And do we need that in couture? Is it time to see, you know, a bit less of the fluff and the feathers and the fruit? Do we need a little bit of kind of architecture, but also a little bit of ideas? Is that something that's, to see it as you said, he is just doing the demi couture, to see that in the context of Paris Couture Week?
Well, I mean, I know that Goga Ashkenazi, who owns Vionnet now, has been buying up a lot of the original drawings from the Vionnet collections, you know, at the start of the century. And so I think she seems to be, I mean, I obviously don't know what's happening inside her head, but she seems to be trying to really create a tribute to the, you know, the original collections that were done back in the, you know, 20s and 30s. So I think maybe she's made quite a positive decision to make the demi couture line something completely different, something that's really taking the brand forward, because she doesn't have a design background. She's an entrepreneur, she's a businesswoman. I mean, she's obviously passionate about fashion.
Yeah, and Hussein said that's why he took the job, but he could see her passion come
So maybe she's decided that they actually want to have, you know, this real creative force to move the brand forward, to push this, you know, more edgy aspect of the brand that she can then follow.
Hettie, how do you think they're going to keep like the original sort of ethos and like the thread that leads it back to a little bit of the originality of the original brand that she did? How do you think Hussein's going to keep that?
Well, I mean, we were just looking at a lovely book of Hussein's work just now, and it's quite evident that he's got that similar architectural approach. You know, he's really somebody that clearly works with the body in 3 dimensions rather than from sketches. And I think she was forgive me if I'm wrong, she was known for kind of working very much on the body, you know.
Draping. She didn't draw. She draped in the round on a half-size mannequin that she had on a piano stool. And the piano stool's really important because she revolved it constantly as she was designing. And actually, often if you look at her clothes, the back is the really distinctive feature. And you can tell the difference, I think, between a designer that draws and a designer that drapes in the round.
And it's not about that immediate sort of visual impact, is it? And it's not either with Hussein. I think there's always so much more. And I think, do you see a lot of correlations between?
No, I definitely do. And I think, you know, you're right. It's because the showpieces tend to get all the press, and they're often made out of these very hard materials. They're very sculptural or architectural, and obviously he's very interested in technology and fashion and that interface. But he's always in the same collections also had this sort of textile thing going that's often very beautifully cut, that drapes really beautifully.
I mean,
he's got a real sensitivity, I think, for fabric and how it hangs.
That's what
that ties across too.
I mean, for me, like as a buyer, when I've got my buyer hat on, I remember going to see like Hussein's shows and being like kind of blown away by the whole like drama and architecture and stuff going on, and then go into the showroom to see the collections, and it was, you know, there was so much subtlety and clarity and, you know, nothing, you know, those were showpieces. Exactly. Those were like, you know, cakes, right? And then when you get down to it, you actually see the flour and the wheat and the butter and all the stuff that goes into it, the purity of it, really.
I think that's a really interesting point, and it's sort of what he is like as a designer. It's very sort of, he does, as much as he makes these showpieces, you know, there is a real sympathy to the women who will wear his pieces. I think that's incredibly important to him. Do you remember the first Hussein show you went to? Do you remember when you first came across him? Because he's one of those designers where people have amazing stories of when he first kind of entered their universe.
I think I've been to 2, and I can't remember what the first one was. I know the first show I ever saw was McQueen, and that I'm afraid that just ruined me.
Yeah, that's it's hard to top that.
Yeah. So that was like, you know, the thing that sticks. But I think there was one, I can't remember which one it was, but it was pretty much mind-blowing and just kind of real theatre on every level and extremely clever. But
do you think the theatre, I guess it comes from the clothes themselves, it's a very different kind of theatre to what we often see in Couture Week, which is theatre in the set and in the ambience, and with him I know he does work a lot with kind of the atmosphere of his shows,
Yeah.
but it feels like the garments themselves are the story.
No, they were absolutely the stars, but it was all the ambience. I think there were like timpani drummers or something going on that added to the whole drama of it, and the whole thing was thought out. And I don't know, I could be making this up, but it felt like there was even a scent. You know, as you were watching it, the whole thing, all my senses were really working, because the whole thing was just sensational, really. I wouldn't know how to put it.
It just blows you away.
Yeah, so I'm so excited to see what he's going to do with this house.
I think the other thing that I think is really worth mentioning at this point is also to do with, you know, the figure of woman as well, because you know, one thing that Vionnet was famous for doing is working without corsets, and the idea of having a natural woman's body and celebrating that and fitting the clothes to accentuate, you know, the natural form. And I think Chaland's also somebody that's quite a political designer. I mean, he's engaged an awful lot with the identity of Middle Eastern women, with veils.
And ideas like immigration, and the
migration,
refugees.
So it's quite interesting to have somebody that's actually quite politically engaged, that's engaged probably with, you know, feminist ideas, with, you know, ideas of women's body issues and this kind of thing, kind of coming back into that house. And again, also looking at the figure of Madame Vionnet, she was a formidable businesswoman.
Yes.
I mean, she didn't just do her collections, they had perfumes, they did, you know, scarves and all kinds of things that were licensed out. And you now have this, you know, new model of the formidable businesswoman for the 21st century, Goga Ashkenazi, that's come in, that's bought this. And a designer that I think is very, you know, sensitive and interesting in the way that he looks at the female form, doing the Haute Couture collection, which I think is quite an interesting combination.
And also, she was a formidable businesswoman, and she also was quite pioneering in terms of looking after her staff, given that, you know, the conditions were really dreadful and there were really bitter labour disputes in the early 20th century in couture. Vionnet was actually very, very enlightened for her time. You know, and she had all sorts of kind of medical facilities there and things like that in her house.
That's interesting. I think when I talk about these kind of correlations between the two of them, it does seem it spreads. It's not just in a kind of aesthetic or sort of creative sense. It does go right down to sort of the way they work as people, which I think is really interesting. I do want to grab you a little bit more about Hussein, because you've written extensively about him, and as you said, you know him well, and it's impossible to kind of summarise a career or such as his. But if you had to kind of explain the Hussein codes or some of the Hussein ideas, what would you see as most key to his vision?
Oh, I wish you wouldn't put me in a spotlight.
I'm really sorry. It's incredibly hard.
I mean, I think it's quite a long career now. He's been designing for over 20 years, hasn't he? So that's what, like 40 collections plus, you know, a lot. I mean, I suppose, I really can't speak for him, and I don't know him that well, but I suppose that the emphasis in the first ones was perhaps more on the sort of conceptual thinking, the showpieces, these huge, great sort of mise en scène, where he did collaborate, you know, with product designers and other people. I think, you know, all really brilliant designers know to who to go and commission to make something for them as well. It's about spotting that. And I think, I mean, he's said that in recent years he's probably more interested in, you know, the set of a sleeve or the cut of a seam than he is so much. Although that said, he has also recently gone back to those much more sort of technologically infused collections, hasn't he? But I think I mean, coming back to Vionnet, I think he does really care about making clothes. You know, he often gets sort of categorised as a kind of artist, intellectual.
And he said, I'm not a conceptual designer. He said, I don't see myself.
But I mean, I think you just have to look at the clothes, as you know, you do, obviously, when you're buying, to kind of see that he really is a fashion designer. Yeah. And I think that's what makes it such an, you know, I'm really excited to see what he does. I can't wait.
I mean, I do remember when we were actually sitting here for the Haider Ackermann panel about 6 months, well, it was back in September, and I think Mimat said, you know, for example, why does nobody really talk about Hussein Chaland at the moment? Why does he seem to have suddenly disappeared? So I think there was kind of a moment of hiatus when he was concentrating more on his art installations.
Do you think fashion can be quite simplistic sometimes? And I think, and it's a controversial question to ask, but I wonder ever if the sort of the breadth of his interest and vision, the fact he's done things with installation, he's done things with film, whether it has kind of hindered people seeing him as a designer that makes clothes, and it's kind of made people put him in this very conceptual box. And we were talking about sort of Madame Vionnet as a kind of unsung hero of design, and sometimes it feels like Hussein is a little bit, you know, sometimes like you think, imagine if he'd been given Balenciaga or something like that. You always kind of wish he'd had a little bit more behind him. Do you ever feel that, Brix? You see him
completely,
as
I sometimes even forget about him.
Yeah.
You know, he just falls off the radar, you know, and it's really kind of shocking to say. I'm like, oh God. And when I heard he had this, you know, I thought, God, that's so interesting. I wonder how that's going to work.
And you think, why has no one given him something before? I think that's...
I mean, maybe for him, I mean, I don't know, because you really know him. I think I've met him, but I don't know him like you do. But maybe it's really important, you know, for his creativity to go off and do these other things and focus on them. And it makes each one better because he gets juice from each different thing that he's doing. And it just... you know, who knows, maybe it's not so important to him to be like, you know, boom, you know,
in the spotlight,
super in the spotlight, yeah.
But I think one thing, you know, it's hard to keep a business going, and there's been points for Hussein, I think, where
it's very hard.
It's sort of, he has struggled a little. Do you think that has anything to do with this kind of, the fact he's been tagged with this conceptual...
I don't know, I just know it's really hard to be an independent British designer, as we all know, it's really hard.
Or independent anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true. And one thing, I do really want to go to the clothes, but there's so much to ask on a topic like this, so I'm sorry to keep grilling you, but I do want to pick up, especially because we have Brix here, about this idea of demi-couture, because I find that very interesting. You know, it's important to say he's not doing couture, he's doing demi-couture, which is still an astronomical price point, but it is slightly more accessible. And do we think there's something quite interesting in that, to see this kind of
Can I just ask a technical question about demi-couture? Is it demi-couture because there are less fittings on the model?
Yeah.
Just one, I think.
Just one, okay. Yeah. So, but each piece is like made specifically for the woman. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would we like to see more of that, this idea that couture, we've talked a lot over these panels about the idea of couture being modernised and made more accessible. We've talked about it a lot in an aesthetic sense, so speaking about what someone like Raf Simons or even the Chanel show today, this kind of youthful look. But it seems to me that's a true way to modernise couture. It's keeping the craft, but it's making it something that still people with an astronomical amount of wealth, but something that more people can afford. Are we glad to see this demi-couture idea? Why does it seem like the right thing for Vionnet and Hussein? It's a tough question, sorry.
Well, I know that it was started, I mean, I think we probably read the same interview, but Goga Ashkenazi said that she was interested in it because it fitted more into the lifestyle of the kind of woman that was buying couture today, that's maybe moving around an awful lot, doesn't necessarily want to have to return 10 times for fitting, you know, and it's actually... To be honest, I guess it fits more into the whole, you know, fast fashion ethos as well.
Yeah.
And not necessarily having to spend so much time.
You get it kind of when you want it a bit more. Yeah.
But I mean, I think if it's keeping the ateliers going, then yeah, it's got to be a good thing.
Got to be a good thing. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I'm not a very good businesswoman, which is a historian, but I think that, you know, haute couture for many decades now has been a lost leader. It's not been where the houses make their profits. They make their profits, you know, from the toiletries and the associated businesses. At the same time, they have this amazing sort of archive of craftsmanship in the ateliers, which is really, you know, and Chanel's actually done something about, you know, buying them up and preserving them. So I suppose it's, as you say, it's great if it contributes to that. I don't know what it means to the house financially, actually. I don't know what difference it would make to knock €1,000 or so off the price of a...
Maybe it's more just kind of...
Maybe it's about I've no idea. Is there kind of marketing? It feels perhaps a bit more modern, a bit sleeker and faster.
On that idea of marketing, do you notice that, Brix? I guess you must, with the women that come into start or are buying pieces that you've selected, do you think they think about couture? Does it have any relevance to the way they shop?
Not my customers particularly, but they do think about the quality and how things are made, and they do think about the fabrications, and that when certain things are cut beautifully and in the most glorious kind of like heavy silks and drape and hang and move beautifully, they feel it on their bodies, and they're, you know, you can feel the quality coming through. And when a dress is, say it's £1,000, it's got to look and feel £1,000, and that's what they want. You can feel the cheapness. So I don't know. I mean, part of me, there's like a really weird like seed of snobbery inside me that's going like, I don't like demi-couture, I like real couture. but I think there's a place for everything, and let's just be open-minded and see, you know. I think it's interesting, and if it works, it works, and if it helps the fashion industry and saves haute couture and saves the houses, good.
Good, yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned this idea of luxury and they want it to feel expensive, because that's another thing we've talked about a little bit, and I think that's quite a new thing over the last 2 or 3 years. Maybe it's kind of off the back of that huge digital print thing we've had, but it seems like there's a kind of apathy towards something just looking great. People want that kind of hands-on feel. They want something that feels a little bit more kind of, you can understand why it costs what it costs. And we talked about designers who I know you're a fan of, people like Simone Rocher, and who are working a lot with textures. But there's a huge number of designers, J.W. Anderson as well, who really, there's that handcrafted thing. Have you noticed that a lot, that people want that feel?
They like, and you know what they love is also they love one-offs, or things that are individual, or one-offs, like this only came in this color and there's only one, or things that were handmade so they're slightly different and not the same. People really love that.
So are we seeing a reaction to like fast fashion? Is that something that people are starting to kind of?
I'm feeling that for sure.
Yeah.
Certainly for the women that can afford it.
Would you agree with that, Hettie? Do you think there's kind of a backlash towards this kind of churning mentality that we got into for a while?
I mean, I always find this quite a difficult question, because I know that for
just thinking about the pace of fashion can also be really exhausting. So,
I know there's been this kind, right from. I think really for the last kind of 15 years or so, there's been this story. People have been trying to peddle this story about craftsmanship and wanting to invest money. The idea that people want to invest money.
We had that made in Britain thing.
And I never know how much that actually sells. I mean, I think for sure you can pick up a piece of clothing and you can feel whether it's beautiful, beautiful cloth. When you're in that middle point, I'm not really sure how much of a selling point it is.
Do you think it's become more of just a narrative then than an actual sort of?
Yeah, I think it's a narrative that slightly became a bit tight. I mean, it's kind of funny, you just mentioned J.W. Anderson, and in his earlier collections, part of the narrative was the fact that he made everything.
And then that kind of just disappeared.
Yeah, I remember when I interviewed him for Time, he said he'd only had one garment made outside of the UK ever. And that was only 2 years ago, and then suddenly that's just, as you say, disappeared off. And I don't know whether the J.W. Anderson customer really cared that much.
Cares. It's interesting actually this season.
I mean, they should. You'd like to think that people do.
I don't think they kind of care where it's made.
Yeah.
Particularly that much. I mean, it's nice to say this is made in Britain,
But shoppers are so international as well. People come over here.
They do care. They do like things that are one-offs, that there only comes in this with this stitch here or this button here or whatever, because it's special to them. That's it.
So people are more individual in how they shop. Yeah, that's interesting. Should we have a look at what's going on? Because I'm getting really excited. There is so much to talk about. I think the interview you referred to was a brilliant interview that a girl called Catherine Zarella did on style.com. She's actually one of my friends as well, so I would like to mention
it. Which was really,
really super interesting, where he talked about his vision for the house. And he says in it, the whole idea is to look at what Vionnet would have done if she were living in this place and time, which I think is a lovely kind of note to start looking at the collection on, because it does feel like there is this focus on what she would have done. How many looks are there in total?
18, I think.
18? Why? Actually, can you answer, why is it always 18? Because it was 18 at Schiaparelli. Is there any reason why it's always 18 looks?
This is the number of looks at trousseau.
Do you think?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Nick Knight from the sidelines.
That's a good fact.
But he didn't have much time. I mean, I think in that interview he said he just signed the contract just before Christmas.
Yeah,
so this has been put together in.
Yeah.
Should we, since it's just 18, should we have a kind of breeze through
Yes.
and then kind of to give us a... What's our immediate thoughts on it? Hettie, what are you look intrigued?
Yeah, I think it's really, there's this really interesting kind of flat panel feeling, and yet this very, very three-dimensional sculptural quality. I mean, it's quite an interesting trick to pull off, and it'd be really lovely to be able to see different sides of the garment as well, if it is at all possible.
See it in motion.
There's a real purity to it, which seems very... Oh, wow.
It would be interesting to know how much she did actually look at the drawings or work in the archive.
Yeah. Because it is interesting what you were saying, Hettie, that a lot of that has been kind of brought by Goga.
But I presume that she was buying it for her own, because she designs the ready-to-wear.
The ready-to-wear,
I assume that
Are you seeing flashes of Madame Vionnet in this when you look at it?
I just wondered when I saw that lap blue as well, and I was thinking there's some of those
Can we go back to
20s dresses, but I'd have to. Don't worry.
We'll just keep going.
Yeah.
I thought that was Nick. I was like, Nick, have you
No.
dozed off?
Yes, it was, yeah. So quite a lot of asymmetry too.
Yeah. But that feels very Hussein. I think when you think of him,
Yes.
you think of these
Exactly.
panels. It's very simplistic. But you think of things like the aeroplane dress and things growing out of.
Although, I mean, I don't know whether it was a reference to Vionnet's own works, but I noticed that in some of the collections that she was doing for ready to wear, she was also doing that thing where there'd be kind of half a skirt and another fabric coming in. So maybe that is a reference back to something from the 30s. I don't know.
Not sure.
Let's talk a little bit about this idea of referencing when we're looking at something like this. Should a designer always reference? Is that something that's really important, or do we think it's nice if they can capture the spirit? Or
I mean, I've got a bit of a bugbear about this
Do you?
anyway.
Okay, this
that I'm sure I've let loose about it. But I mean, I do think that there's, people get all kind of wound up about, it's not true to the code to the house. And I just think it becomes constricting. And I think if you've got somebody that's a really serious creative talent, you buy into that.
And it gets into this notion of archiving as well, because we've been talking about this on the Schiaparelli discussion. Not all designers have access to a great archive, and it can be really hard actually to sort of be able to go and people always bring up that example of McQueen at Givenchy, but even with the Schiaparelli, there isn't a great archive. Moccasinini doesn't have access to the most sort of a lot of the pieces. So I guess it is difficult to be a designer. I think people think quite simplistically about what they'd have access to.
I mean, what I'm seeing here that makes a reference, it's not an explicit visual reference, but there's certainly that kind of freedom of movement, there's that unfettered feeling, which I imagine is true in spirit, but was pleating very important? Because I remember the first person that was appointed was Sofia Kokosalaki, and that pleating was a big deal for her.
I don't
Was it a
think
big
there's
part of the
lot.
original?
In the museum pieces I've seen, there isn't a lot. The other thing about Vionnet in museums is that nearly everything that's preserved is evening wear. There's hardly any day wear. I mean, the ratio is tiny.
Yeah.
And her day wear was quite different, and it's interesting that all of this is, I think, more in the spirit of the evening wear.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Actually, this feels very.
I read that they called her the grandmother of the modern dress.
Yeah.
And is that just because of the sort of fluidity and the ease with which her garments fit?
I think it's partly, yes, it's the fluidity, it's the ease. There's a paradox in them in that they're very comfortable and easy to wear, but they're also very body revealing. So there's a certain kind of rigor that requires women, that I think the historian Peter Wallen said that the 20th century replaced, the outer discipline of the corset with the inner discipline of diet and exercise.
Yeah.
So there's much more pressure on having a sort of honed, beautiful body, because the corset isn't going to do it for you.
And this does feel very sensual in that way. Those opening looks, in particular, number 1, 2, and 3, they feel very. It's incredibly revealing. It's incredibly about the body, and even it's slightly sheared.
It's like petals opening up.
I think the first nipple you ever saw through a dress in Vogue was something like 1932, and it was a Vionnet dress.
Was it? That's amazing.
Yeah, and the other thing she did that was very pioneering then was to use lingerie techniques for evening wear. So the actual, cut and construction. Was also, I suppose, I mean, I think there's a real respect for the body there, and it's not the most obvious bits of the body that are bared. Very often in Vionnet, it's the flank, it's the side, there's a little sort of cut out there or something. And maybe you see that here too, they're quite sort of high neck, these, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, one isn't.
I love that one here, number 3. I don't know how easy it is for you to see, but that sort of that slightly asymmetrical reveal of that clavicle there, that's it's very sensual, but
I mean, I think these really relate to his recent collections as well. But I mean, I love the fact that he's almost literally starting with a blank piece of paper as the first thing. So it's really kind of clean.
It's a palette cleanser, isn't it? Which is lovely. You think when you are sort of, I know the house has been revived since 2006, but when you're in the process of kind of re-establishing a house or offering your vision to do something that feels so pure, I think it's incredibly respectful.
I think it's.
Yeah, can we? That would be amazing. What's your take on it, Brix?
Well, I mean, the first three there, for the first thing I think is exactly like petals and so feminine and so clean and so just absolutely beautiful. But at the same time, the shape and the cut of them are very strong.
Incredible.
So it's like really showing like really two sides of a woman, the beautiful femininity, softness, sheerness, vulnerability, and the strength. And I think it is quite stunning, really, really stunning. I mean, those for me, those were kind of dresses I'd love to see someone wear on the red carpet.
Yeah, it's absolutely
But
beautiful.
there's a lot more complexity in the cut, isn't there?
Yeah.
If you go back to even
We
that
go back to
second
that
one, it's
circle.
got several layers. It looks like, is it a silk chiffon? Do you think?
I don't know what it is.
But
hard
that
to know.
circle that's getting
You look at
increasingly
the circle, that's
circles,
that.
But that's 3 layers of fabric, isn't it? And you can see it's getting thinner towards the centre.
And it's
At least
pointing
3.
to her center.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. It's like, you know,
And this notion of
there's
reveal and
many
conceal,
layers
that's so
on
much
every
shame.
level
Yeah,
going on here.
No, completely.
And I know I've kind of kvetched quite a bit about, you know, the way that a lot of the way that fashion's photographed straight on the runway on very small screens has really killed a lot of the detail and the association detail. I mean, that's the kind of garment that gets just destroyed by having Instagram pictures on the runway. You can't see anything.
Oh no, yeah.
So what's lovely is that somebody's, you know,
doing close
actually doing the clothes like that.
And I think I'm interested because we talked a lot about the references to sort of Man and Vionnet, but are we seeing references, you know, to Hussein? You know, I just said there that idea of reveal and conceal, you know, undress and dress. It's so Hussein, and even just in that circle, that's reference. But are you seeing a lot of Hussein spirit in this, Caroline?
Yes.
What does this say about the direction he's taking? Because you know, you mentioned before that he likes this idea of clothes on the body, and to me, this feels it's moved away from that kind of architecture. It's more the body, which is nice to see.
I think it's about fabric and how it hangs and what you can do with it. It's really about letting the medium determine the design to some extent. You know, you really use the characteristics of the fabric. You use the weight of it.
That's interesting. The medium determining the design.
And there are also these really hard bits on a lot. I mean, I think the last 3 silhouettes that we've seen, there are, you know, what I'd almost call integrated accessories. So that things like the belts and the necklaces are really stiff supporting pieces with these extremely, you know, generous volumes of fabric coming off.
Which is exactly what you were saying, Brix. It's tough, but it's also that softness, and that feels incredibly modern,
But
I think.
those accessories there on 10, 11, and 12 almost to me look like wires.
Yeah, it's very
like
ticky.
hooking you up to some kind of medical support or bones or some interesting you know, like something that should be inside is on the outside.
Kind of exoskeleton.
Yeah, exoskeleton. Thank you, journalist. Thank you for my words. That's exactly what I write. It is exoskeletal. Yeah, and I think, and I'm, you know, really loving this because to me, it's making me think in lots of different ways and bringing up lots of stuff for me, which
that's what couture is meant to do, isn't it? You're meant to want to interact with the pieces, and I think with that, you know, there's this idea of how personal that piece feels. You know, the fact that there's all these different details.
And these are very, very complex pieces that look incredibly simple in the way that you know. But you look at just even the darts and
that's he seems to reference his paper dresses. You know, that's so much, which is so. I think there's something quite uplifting about this collection as well. You know, it's incredibly sort of intelligent and intellectual and cerebral, but there's something that feels very sort of fun and playful about it. I don't know if it is because it feels very feminine and sensual, but those pieces there, just those, you know, that kind of, it almost looks like a pattern, you know, the graph paper, it's very technical.
But it's totally wearable. Totally wearable, all of it. I could see all of it. And these final ones here, 18 and 19 and 17, with like the draft paper and the black stripe going down is so, you know, slimming to the silhouette when you look at it, when you look at it from a distance, and it's almost, there's something almost Japanesey about it, like kimono-y bit going on.
Wasn't she quite fascinated by kimonos as well? Am I making that up?
I'm sure you're not.
I feel bad because before we started, we said we wouldn't put Caroline on the spot, and you're becoming our resident fact checker.
I have a kind of vague memory that she was quite fascinated with kimonos, and it was one of her kind of key shapes.
I mean, certainly what you find in the day wear is that she doesn't, most designers do some version of drapery for evening wear, and then day wear they do tailoring.
Yeah.
And her tailoring was much more like a kind of sculpting to the body, which is not the same as your question, but it was really using darts in a way that isn't the same as Western tailoring.
Yeah.
To sculpt shoulders and things.
It seems we love this. We seem very impressed by it. To me, this is I'm so happy because I was so excited for this, and this is like absolutely beautiful. Is this what demi-couture, is this what we should be seeing in Couture Week? Has this uplifted us? Is it the right thing for the house, but also is it the right thing for Couture Week? What's your take on it? Are you going to go away happy, Hettie?
I'm very happy, yeah. I think there's kind of wafts of, this has got some kind of, there's definitely a kind of feeling of a kind of Art Deco sensibility coming through this as well. And but I also feel that it's really kind of true to him as well. So, we were talking about these, Brix was talking about these kind of exoskeleton pieces, but then you can relate that back to, ancient Mediterranean costume, where you've got these billows of fabric that are contained by, metal jewellery. And then that also relates into, Japanese kimonos and things being kind of constrained and creating shapes out of constraint and volume. And I think, what I feel is that he's enjoying having, that extra investment of technique and the kind of handwork being done in these garments. So these are really complex technical pieces.
Would you agree that you were nodding there, Caroline? Do you think he will be enjoying having that kind of those resources at his fingertips?
Well, I imagine, who wouldn't? And I think they're really interesting because they look very simple in long shot at a distance. And I think you have to go in quite close to understand some of the complexity. I mean, I suspect we can't get to it even in pictures at this size. You need to go really close.
You should go
and that also is very like Vionnet. I mean, I've seen Vionnets in museums when I haven't actually known how to photograph them because the construction is so complicated. You can't figure it out, and you don't know how to lay the garment out so that you can convey what it is. And I think there's some of that complexity, or rather some comparable complexity going on in some of these.
And is that what we want on the runway, though, that idea of kind of, especially on the couture runway, you want to go in and you want to think that...
I think you want some pleasure from it all.
Yeah.
You want some artistry, don't you? You want something that is really brilliant that, you wouldn't get off the high street.
And how does this fit into Hussein's sort of narrative as a designer? Do you see this if you were tracking him? How does this fit into sort of where he's going, what he's thinking about at the moment? Because I think you do see these continued preoccupations in his work. We mentioned some of them, this idea of the refugee, of travel, of movement, and you see a lot of woman, you see a lot of that, but how does this fit into sort of the things we know he thinks about and the ways he designs?
Well, for me, this collection is actually more abstract. I think it seems to me he's thinking about much more formal values. He's thinking about volume, shape, a certain sort of graphic quality at the end. He's thinking about, flou, about drapery.
It's just all in the garments, isn't it?
I think it really is in this
Couture
collection.
should be.
But also very modern as well. I mean, you look at those two pieces we've just looked at with those real kind of neon-y colours. I mean, even this one, number 9 here, which on a certain level looks like an extremely classic floor-length evening gown.
Could almost be the bride. Couldn't
But
it?
it feels so modern, and it's got that the texture of the skirt is really extraordinary.
It feels it seems medieval to me as well.
Yeah. It's that wonderful balance, isn't it, between something so opulent and kind of
divine.
Yeah. I love, actually, these 7 and 8, I think, are the looks that, I don't think they're my favourite aesthetically, but they're some of the looks that intrigue me the most because it feels so sort of, you just want to try that on, you want to have it fitted to you, and also I think you can imagine that being worn, you can imagine seeing that, and it feels very true to how women dress, which is exciting given what we were saying about Goga and how she is a couture client, she wears couture, and you can imagine her sort of in this.
Actually, it was with those two that I was wondering whether he'd been into the archive, because you do see some dresses with these sort of overlapping semicircles going all the way down. There was one in the Haute Couture exhibition in Paris last summer.
Well, maybe you were saying as we started that he was talking about wondering what she'd do if she could work now, and so I guess he's using the availability of women's legs and this kind of thing to maybe evolve
That's interesting how he's played
really
with the
evolved the
freedoms that
design.
women have.
I just
now.
want to call your attention to number 4, where the circles are circling her nunny. And on number 3, where the circles are circling like the womb area,
But
like
it's
the
incredibly
ovary.
sensual.
Yeah.
And it is that idea of, you know, you were just saying, Hettie, this idea of like what she would do if she could do it now. And it feels like that freedom, you know, that we actually see a lot of that. Christopher Kane did that collection where it was sheer sort of right up into the crotch, and it feels like that's something that he can do now. And you wonder, you know, as you mentioned Caroline before, that she played with these, it was the unexpected areas of the body.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly playful to see. So we're happy with this collection then. We all seem...
And the colours are beautiful,
Yeah.
I think.
It's also, just to be very simplistic, it's just beautiful, and that's what you want when you see couture. It's beautiful without being opulent or showy, which I think is really
it's
nice.
totally celebrating the woman and celebrating her strength and her assets and also her vulnerability, fragility, and inner beauty.
It's a very empowering note to finish on. Thank you so much, guys. That was absolutely lovely. A lovely collection for a lovely panel. So, perfect.